Breaking news here on Tracking the Tropics. Tropical storm Ida forming in the Caribbean Sea with a track that takes it into the Gulf of Mexico, where it's expected to intensify ahead of landfall in the United States this weekend, likely as a hurricane. The latest models and a meteorologist Q&A starts now here on Tracking the Tropics. Hey there, folks. JB Buno here with you live in your hurricane headquarters. Great to have Tampa Oy's Heather Melendez joining us here. We're going to be talking about where Ida is expected to head in the days ahead, hours ahead, really. Let's get to the very latest here with Tracking the Tropics meteorologist Ian Oliver. We're going to be looking for your questions here in the Facebook Live comment section. If you want to ask us a question here, use hashtag HeyJB, hashtag HeyHeather, or hashtag HeyIan for Tracking the Tropics meteorologist Ian Oliver with the latest here in this special advisory that was just put out by the National Hurricane Center. Ian.
JB, good evening. Yeah, we've been tracking these three areas of low pressure in the tropics for the last several days. We mentioned that 99L, that was the one we were watching the most closely for impacts. That became Tropical Depression 9 earlier this morning at 11 a.m. And unfortunately, we just got that special update in 5:20 from the National Hurricane Center. 5 o'clock update came out. This was still a tropical depression, but hurricane hunters were inside the storm investigating it, and what they found was that it has intensified into Tropical Storm Ida. This is the 9th named storm of the 2021 Atlantic Basin hurricane season, and unfortunately, it's looking like this is going to be an impactful one. It's been looking better and better all day on satellite, indications of better organization. You see its center of circulation just west of Jamaica. This is going to be impacting places like the Cayman Islands, where tropical storm warnings are in effect tonight, areas that were just impacted by Hurricane Grace. And it's on a path that'll take it to the western tip of Cuba as we head on through the latter portion of the work week tomorrow, intensifying in the northwestern Caribbean and then into the central Gulf of Mexico. Unfortunately, this is one of the most ripe areas in the whole basin right now for intensification. You got the northwestern Caribbean, very deep, very warm water. Same can be said about the central Gulf of Mexico, and there's just not a whole lot holding this system back from intensifying. Very low wind shear environment over the next few days, Friday and into the weekend. So unfortunately, we could be talking about a scenario here where this is a system that's intensifying all the way up until landfall. What you see on the forecast track here is expected to be the latter portion of the day on Sunday, perhaps as a Category 2, maybe even at or near, at least, major hurricane intensity, Category 3 intensity. So that's what we'll be watching very closely as we move on through the next few days, how strong this system gets before it makes landfall on the northern Gulf Coast. Right now, indications Louisiana or Mississippi, the most likely place for a landfall location as we head into the latter portion of the weekend. You do see that forecast models are in very good consensus, a good agreement among these forecast models with the eventual path of this system over the western portion of Cuba and then eventually to the northern Gulf Coast as a very strong hurricane, unfortunately, with some big impacts. We talked about those warm sea surface temperatures, low and mid 80s, not only in the northwestern Caribbean, but also through the central Gulf of Mexico, loop current there, some of the warmest water that we have in the entire basin. And that, of course, is what tropical systems draw their fuel off of, that latent heat of condensation with very warm sea surface temperatures. A little bit of dry air on the western flank of this system, nothing that it can't overcome, unfortunately, over the next few days. There just isn't a lot negatively impacting this system outside of a little bit of land interaction. It won't happen for long as it's moving, really just clipping that western coastline, western tip of Cuba. This is the GFS forecast model. You see by the time it's approaching the northern Gulf Coast, this is a very well-formed hurricane at this point. This is Sunday morning early and then late Sunday or the afternoon into the evening. That's where we're expecting a landfall with this system. Rainfall forecast spreads that farther inland. Quickly, we'll touch on these other two systems. We have Ida now, but we could be talking about two more named storms in short order. You've got a couple areas of low pressure out in the central tropical Atlantic. These will likely be developing over the next couple to few days, but thankfully they're on a forecast path. You see the forecast for both of these systems. Quick turn to the north, out over open water in the Atlantic. So thankfully, we're not expecting trouble with these two systems, but they may get names as we move on through the next couple days, through the weekend or the early part of next week. So three systems that we're watching, and unfortunately, JB, Ida looks like it'll be a very impactful one.
Yeah, our friends on the northern Gulf Coast really keeping a very, very close eye on this one. Ian Oliver is going to sit down with us for a few minutes and take our questions here, or take your questions here, folks, here on Tracking the Tropics. Heather Melendez joining us here as well in your hurricane headquarters. If you've been with us here before in Tracking the Tropics, you know how this works as far as our meteorologist Q&A. We'll activate it here on the bottom of your screen. Use hashtag HeyJB, hashtag HeyHeather, hashtag HeyIan. We can take your questions here out of the Facebook Live comment section. And we're going to start here with this one that just came in here a short time ago, and it's for you, Heather. And I think that this one, we're pretty much in the clear here. You know, before we get to this question, Heather, why don't we just talk a little bit about that land interaction that we have here with Cuba? Because the first landfall that we have here with Ida likely won't be in the United States. It'll likely be here in Cuba.
That's right, JB. And something that's very interesting that I think that is important when we talk about hurricanes are these land interactions and geography. Cuba is a mixture of rolling plains and mountains. And unfortunately, there's a mountain called the Sierra de los Órganos that's only 2,000 feet in elevation. And that's just not enough to really debilitate and deteriorate these vertically stacked systems. So unfortunately, as Tropical Storm Ida approaches Cuba, it's going to make landfall near Havana, which is one of the most populated cities in western Cuba. And with that mountain range, I don't think it's enough to kind of break it apart. And it's going to sustain its tropical storm wind gusts in those areas. Also, when we look at these storm systems, it's always the far right quadrant that really experiences the worst of it. So areas in Pino del Rio, Havana, they're really going to get those stronger wind gusts and those heavier rain bands as it approaches.
And again, folks, we're here to take your questions. We're tapping into a lot of different Facebook pages here across the southeastern United States, especially. Again, Heather Melendez, Ian Oliver, JB Buno here with you live, everybody, on Tracking the Tropics. And again, if you use a hashtag, we can feature your comments here. And let's just get this one out of the way, Ian, because we know that this one is a big one. Levi Stewart joining us, hashtag HeyJB. Will Ida hit Florida? And while I'm sure there's some panhandle communities that are watching this one, most of Florida just outside of really the impact zone for this storm.
Yeah, northern Gulf Coast, you're certainly on alert moving through the weekend. You need to have these preps complete tomorrow, Saturday at the latest. This is going to be a very impactful hurricane, the most impactful that we've seen so far this season, perhaps the strongest. We're talking about the possibility. Grace actually did reach major hurricane intensity before it made landfall in Mexico. But on the northern Gulf Coast, you do see this tight grouping among these forecast models. That's indicating high confidence. That's what we like to see for a high confidence forecast, is all of the forecast models essentially giving us the same projection, which unfortunately for folks in Louisiana after last year, yeah, it's in Cuba and in portions of Mississippi. This is going to be a very impactful system. Is this going to change a little bit as we head on through the next couple of days? Of course, but we're looking at typically the National Hurricane Center's miss at about 5 days is 200 nautical miles or less. So if you live across the northern Gulf Coast, that's simply not enough to avoid the impacts with this system.
We got a lot of viewers joining us from WJTV's Facebook page. Hello to you folks joining us there. We got a lot of folks joining us at a lot of different Facebook pages. We're getting to your questions coming up. WJTV here in just a moment. Really quickly for you, Heather, we can get this one out of the way pretty quickly from Jerry here. Hashtag Hey Heather. Going on a cruise September 4th to the Bahamas. How does the forecast look? And really this one for Jerry, I don't think Jerry has much to worry about here because that's the following weekend.
Yes, that is next weekend, Saturday the 4th. I really think that it's going to be clear. As we head into this weekend, that's when we're going to see those rain bands approaching the Caribbean. It could reach the Caribbean. I don't think it'll affect you for those plans on the September 4th.
How about this one here? Let's get to that question from WJTV. It comes from Marlo Castillo. Hashtag HeyJB. What's it looking like for Jackson, Mississippi, Ian? And listen, if you're on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, if you're on the Alabama Gulf Coast, our friends WKRG's Facebook page, WGNO's Facebook page, you guys, this is a storm that's really coming right for you. And we talk about it all the time, Ian, but really that eastern quadrant of this system is really the one that we're going to be watching very closely.
Yeah, and that's why I'm still saying northern Gulf Coast. The trends this afternoon with the forecast models did nudge a little bit farther off to the east, and any of those jogs in either direction are going to determine who sees the brunt of this, the worst of this, where we're going to see obviously hurricane conditions, perhaps major hurricane conditions, dangerous storm surge. This is going to be a very, very impactful system, a dangerous system along the immediate coastline, especially as Heather mentioned, on the right side of wherever that center moves on shore. That can't be ironed out just yet. There is still some uncertainty left or right, west or east, as far as where the system will actually move on shore. That's what we'll iron out over the next few days. But anywhere, I would say, from the western panhandle to the eastern part of the Texas Gulf Coast, you essentially need to be prepared and staring at the system as we move on through the end of the week and the weekend.
Chanel JD from KLFY's Facebook page, that's Louisiana. And of course, we got a lot of stations in Louisiana and a lot of Facebook fans joining us from there. Hashtag AJB will hit Lafayette, Louisiana. And of course, really all of coastal Louisiana at this point, Ian, has to be on alert.
Yes, in the cone, and impacts will be felt well outside the cone. When I woke up this morning, the forecast models were indicating a forecast that essentially would be a direct hit on a place like Lafayette, Louisiana. Mentioned that little jog to the east in the forecast models in the afternoon run. So this is to be expected. That can and will change. You'll see that cone and the forecast path nudged left and right, likely as we head on through each forecast cycle. We'll be watching this very closely, bringing you the latest information. But yes, anywhere in Louisiana, you need to be prepared for the potential, at least, for a strong hurricane, maybe even a major hurricane.
I'll bring you guys both up for this one. Tiffany here asking, hashtag KJB, is Houston in its line? And right now, it looks like Houston there right outside the cone, Ian. So, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Houston won't see impacts. It just, there's still a lot of time before that system or before Ida actually gets a little bit closer to the Texas Gulf Coast.
Yeah, JB, those cones are just a guidance, but that doesn't mean because your city is not in the cone, it's not going to experience any kind of change. Like Ian said, every day we're going to be tracking it because any small maneuver, any shift can really change drastically. And we saw that with Hurricane Grace. And so it's always a good thing to keep in mind that even though your city's not in the cone, you probably could start preparing for that. Peak of hurricane season's the 10th. We're just days away. So if you are in the northern Gulf Coast, I think it's a good idea to start hatching out a plan and being prepared because these type of systems, this is the path that they normally take for the month of August and September.
Wide range of solutions ranging from very dry air getting pulled down on the western side of the circulation for Houston, or even some fringe impacts. At this point, it's looking unlikely. You saw the spaghetti plots. I'll pull those back up for you. They are coming into a much greater consensus for Louisiana or Mississippi direct impact, so it would be well off to the east of there. But again, it's the possibility of a major hurricane in the Gulf. Anybody that lives along any portion of the northern Gulf Coast needs to be taking this pretty seriously.
A lot of questions coming in from the Alabama Gulf Coast, my old stomping grounds. Hello to all the folks joining us from Mobile and Baldwin counties, like Matthew Paul joining us from WKRG's Facebook page. Hey, WMBB's Facebook page, Florida Panhandle. You guys are coming up next. We are getting to the questions coming in from there as well. But Matthew here asking, hashtag AJB, Mobile or Baldwin County, what's it looking like? And of course, our friend Ed Bloodsworth up there at WKRG, of course, monitoring this one very, very closely and really right there in the Conian.
I'm sure we'll have Ed on the broadcast as we move on through the next couple of days. Ed's a great meteorologist. He has a great team in Mobile. They'll be watching this thing very closely. I'd be concerned with any shift to the east for some greater impacts into Mobile Bay. You see the forecast path does have this on the eastern side, or the center of circulation passing to the west of Mobile, which would push water as it approaches into Mobile Bay, which would lead to some storm surge concerns. The proximity, how close that center comes to Mobile Bay, the worst solution, of course, would be just west. That remains to be seen. We're looking right now at a forecast consensus, which would be farther west than that, but you need to be prepared again. Tomorrow, Saturday, we'll be watching for any changes.
This is the last call for questions. Another 5 minutes. Our meteorologists, of course, have a lot to get to here on Tracking the Tropics as far as where Ida is going to be getting to next here, folks. So let's get to how about WMBB's Facebook page. Shout out to Jessica Marie Guzman joining us. Hashtag HJB. What about Panama City, Florida? We don't need this. Florida has had enough. You know, it's funny. You know, Jessica says this, and I'm sure the folks in Louisiana are saying, man, no, we've had enough based on what occurred in the 2020 Atlantic hurricane season. So, Ian, Heather, Panama City, there on the Florida Panhandle. What do we say for Jessica here?
Yeah, 5 landfalling systems last season in Louisiana, and the potential to make it another one here, the first one for this season. The Panhandle, I would be watching it. Unlike what we've seen with earlier season storms that didn't really have that classic structure, lopsided systems with impacts well displaced from that center of circulation, this is unfortunately going to be a proper hurricane that's intensifying all the way up until landfall. It'll have a satellite presentation and a symmetry that you would expect from essentially a classic hurricane, maybe a major hurricane, which actually brings greater impacts, but they're, again, more symmetrical around that center of circulation. So that may keep some of those impacts away from the Western Panhandle. It'll depend as we iron out this track over the next couple of days where exactly it moves onshore. But for now, it's really some impacts for southeastern Louisiana, Mississippi, maybe Alabama. But we'll watch, of course, for some storm surge and the possibility of some flooding rain.
Let's get to this one here from Mary Beth Neal, WJTV. Facebook page, hashtag HAB. It looks like the Pine Belt could be on the bad side. Does this mean possible tornadoes? We always talk about the possibility of spin-up tornadoes with a tropical cyclone here, the Pine Belt, southeast Mississippi. What do we say here for Mary Beth Neal from WJTV's Facebook page?
I mean, we could never rule out a tornado with those strong gusty winds. Those rain bands are just strong enough as it makes land interactions. And so I would say you can never say no.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be a threat with a possibility of a major hurricane. These are going to be some strong rain bands moving onshore, especially when you get close to that center of circulation. So yeah, isolated tornadoes, certainly a possibility within some of those stronger rain bands.
Let's get to this one here. A lot of questions coming in here, folks. Again, if you're just joining us here, everybody, JB Buno, Heather Melendez, Ian Oliver here with us. Another 3 or so minutes of taking your questions here. So try to get them in here, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Kind of go rapid fire here, you guys, and try to get to as many of these as possible. Great question about the size of the storm coming in here from Angel Burgess, joining us from WKRG's Facebook page, hashtag HAB. What's the projected diameter of this storm when it makes landfall? And I'll tell you, Ian, I was looking at this on satellite when you were live at the wall a moment ago, and on satellite, it looks pretty large. It's pretty impressive from what we're seeing right now, and it's not even a hurricane just yet.
Yeah, but it's still in the process of consolidating right now, JB. So typically when they release a full update, the National Hurricane Center, they would tell you the diameter of the winds. This was a special update that came out at 5:20 once the hurricane hunters found that and upgraded it. So my guess would be there's really only a small area within this system right now where we're actually seeing true tropical storm conditions. Those were what were sampled by the hurricane hunters, which is why they called it in and bumped this up to Ida, gave it its name, 9th named storm of the season, a tropical storm. As it consolidates, what you're seeing there to an extent, JB, is still kind of a sloppier system that's organizing itself. That's come into a much better picture over the course of the day today. My guess at this point, which would be just a projection, would be talking about tropical storm force winds extending out a couple hundred miles from the center of circulation, likely with hurricane force winds, perhaps 50 to 75, but that remains to be seen. We need to see how this system evolves really in the short term over an environment that's quite favorable to get stronger.
And for those of you joining us here, folks, on Tracking the Tropics, we are live as these storms develop. So all the updates that we get in from the National Hurricane Center, we're going to be live with updates as they become available. Not every update, because some updates are smaller than others, but significant updates, we're going to, of course, let you know about it here on whatever app, website, or social media platform that you're watching on right now. So look for our updates here on Tracking the Tropics.
JB, quick heads up, they did push that out with the latest update. Tropical storm force winds extending out 205 miles from the center of circulation. So this is a very broad system. It'll likely consolidate a little bit as it's getting stronger. But yeah, as far as area goes, it's a large wind field.
And that, of course, pertaining to the last question that we had asking about the diameter of the storm. Ashley Bryant, WMBB's Facebook page in Panama City, hashtag HAB. I think all of us in the Panama City area are concerned due to the history for us with Michael and similar track. And of course, as we always preach here on Tracking the Tropics, don't have to panic, of course. Always keeping you educated and alerted to the very latest here is what we have. But right now, really, it's Louisiana, Mississippi, Gulf Coast, even Alabama, Gulf Coast, Ian, that really has to be just keeping a really close eye on the system, especially. Yeah,
and this is a storm that developed an hour ago, coming up on exactly an hour ago right now. Its projected landfall would be in about 3 days from now. So there is plenty of time on the northern Gulf Coast to put your hurricane plan into place. Make sure you have all your preps done early part of the weekend. It would really be probably early Sunday where conditions start to deteriorate. We're talking about a landfall in the northern Gulf Coast Sunday afternoon and into the evening. So we're still 3 days out.
Yeah.
And how about this one here from Kristen from KLFY's Facebook page, joining us from Louisiana. Are we expecting winds to start in southern Louisiana at 2 o'clock on Sunday? And Ian, maybe this is a good opportunity here for all of us here just to kind of chat really briefly just about time frame of arrival, whether this is making a landfall in Louisiana, whether it's Mississippi, Alabama, what time of the weekend could we actually be seeing the impacts from the storm arriving on the northern Gulf Coast?
Getting the forecast path pulled back up for you, JB, but if you look here, by Saturday night, early Sunday, the question about when can you start expecting gusty winds, you got to remember that's just a forecast point on the forecast cone. The center there is where they're anticipating the center of circulation to be, but we just discussed tropical storm force winds extend out over 200 miles with this system. So conditions start going downhill as early as Saturday night, perhaps even Saturday evening for portions of the immediate Louisiana, Mississippi coastline. But that still gives you this evening, all day Friday, and essentially all day Saturday to prepare for what is going to be an impactful system where that center moves onshore.
And then the last two questions that we're going to take here, they're coming in from separate Facebook pages. How about Carly Lewis, KXAN, joining us, everybody from Texas, #AJB or #JB. What's the chance it changes course? And, one of the things, Ian, I was talking about, too, with Amanda Holly, one of our other Track in the Tropics meteorologists, is that there appears to be some sort of a consensus with our spaghetti models, at least at this stage and where we are with this system.
That's right, JB. There's not going to be much change since most of the spaghetti models, we can pull those up for you, are in agreement. And so at least we can say that there's not really going to be a great shift. So most models here are indicating that it could affect either eastern Louisiana or Mississippi almost.
Yeah, there'll be some nudges left and right as we head on through the next couple of days. But unlike some of the sloppier storms that we've tracked earlier this season, when you see that big fan out with the spaghetti plots, that's because the forecast models really having a tough time figuring out where exactly the center of this circulation is. Well, the hurricane hunters just sampled it. We know exactly where the center of the storm is, and forecast models really agree they have a good idea of where this is heading second half of the weekend.
And let's preface this final question that we're going to be taking here, everybody, by saying that we're always here to always make sure that do not panic. It's always about having a plan in place, executing that plan, and always just being in the know. The more that you are aware of the updates that they come in, as they come in from us and from the National Hurricane Center, the more prepared that you can be. And as Ian noted here a short time ago, there are several days here before the storm arrives somewhere on the northern Gulf Coast. But we do have a lot of questions coming in here, very similar to John's from WJTV's Facebook page, #KJB. Is it possible that this could be another Katrina? And of course, Katrina, arguably the most destructive hurricane on record here for us, and at least over the last couple of decades here in the United States. So Ian, we get this question a lot, comparing potential storms that haven't even really reached hurricane status yet to some of the bigger names on record, such as Katrina. We had Michael mentioned earlier on here on stream, but again, we caution people. It's easy to jump to conclusions. It's easy to start making comparisons, but we still have a tropical storm here. We likely will have a Category 1 or 2 hurricane, potentially, like you said, a Category 3 hurricane, but we have to remind people to pump the brakes sometimes.
Yeah, we had those comments last year with Laura when we were tracking that. I believe with Delta, we had a lot of opportunities to talk about impacting landfalling storms in Louisiana. Of course, when you're talking about the possibility of a major hurricane making landfall in Louisiana, just as far as a frame of reference, that storm's going to come up. A lot has changed, and as you mentioned, always so hesitant to compare any tropical systems. They come in different shapes and sizes. They present different hazards. Of course, the big difference between now and Katrina is now the levee system has been fully updated and implemented. So that is, there'll be likely some bad storm surge flooding regardless with this forecast path outside of the levee system, but there were a lot of factors that led to that disaster sadly being what it was. So I would just worry about this as its own system. The main threats that we're always talking about with tropical systems, of course, damaging winds is going to be a possibility. High-end Cat 2, perhaps a major hurricane. Storm surge, always the deadliest part of tropical systems. And then freshwater flooding. We're going to have a lot of heavy rainfall, especially north and east of wherever the system moves onshore. We'll iron that out for you over the next several days. But if you're in the forecast path of this system or near it, you really need to take this seriously because this has the potential, at least, to be one of the the bigger storms, likely the biggest storm we've seen so far this season.
Ian noted the levee system, and really every time that a storm hits a particular geographic area, especially here in the United States, we learn more, we understand more about how tropical cyclones affect our communities and different, of course, geographic areas, whether it's us here in Tampa with something like Irma, or whether it's like in Louisiana with a storm like Katrina. We're always learning here, and of course, that's part of what we do here as far as tracking the tropics here, folks, keeping you informed as to the very latest, talking about how storms form, where they form, exactly how strong they are set to become. We're going to have more updates here on Tropical Storm Ida, again, expected to become a hurricane as it treks a little bit closer into the or towards the Gulf Coast before a eventual landfall at some point, likely on Sunday on the northern Gulf Coast. All the updates that we have for you, of course, will be on whatever app or website that you're watching on right now. We'll have more live updates here over the next 72 hours as we continue to monitor Tropical Storm Ida in the Caribbean Sea. For Heather Melendez, Ian Oliver, I'm JB Buno. We'll see you for the next edition of Tracking the Tropics.
Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics.